G'day, welcome to another Friday Fundamentals with Club V Volleyball. My name is Daniel Jones. I am the new club director down at Club V South in London, and I want to do a little education session around the truth about mindful reps. It's something we hear referred to often in volleyball, and it's something that we want to be knowledgeable about and understand what it actually means because it's easier to say and a lot harder to do. So I'm going to go into the background a little bit about what it means to be mindful and some of the science behind why it's important. So mindful reps, we hear it often, and it's really built on this statement here that reps leads to competence and competence leads to confidence. Huge believer that as you increase the number of reps that you get at any given activity, whether it's volleyball or other activities like cooking or digging a hole, the more reps you get, the better you will get at it, the more competent you will get at that given skill. The more competent you are, the more confident you will become in executing that skill. Now, of course, the environment that you execute that skill in is irrelevant. You can't execute a skill in a safe environment or a settled environment. It needs to be reflective of what the skill is going to be, what's going to be demanded of the skill. So in the case of volleyball, we'd call it a random environment where we don't necessarily know where the ball is coming from every time. We don't know what speed it's coming at, and we don't know what angle it's going to be coming to us. So we need to practice the reps within the right environment to create competence. And once we are doing that, then it will create confidence. So it's the coach's job to create the environment. It's the coach's job to design drills that will provide reps in a random environment that are reflective of the game of volleyball. One of the things I want to stress is we are all in a race against time. So when you think about it, every one of us as people is we have a limited period of time that we have to achieve what we want to achieve. So in the instance of youth volleyball, you have so many days, weeks, months, years to become as competent as possible and therefore as confident as possible in your skills. Now, some of you who are watching may be early in your career and you may have a number of years ahead of you. Some of you may be later in your career and have less years or days or weeks or months in front of you. But we are all racing against time. And so, how do we maximize our reps to increase our competence, to maximize our confidence in the quickest way possible? And that's where we start talking about mindful reps. Okay? Mindful reps are going to accelerate our competence. So we will get competent faster at any given skill if we are being more mindful. And that will increase our confidence again at a rapid rate, at an increased speed. So, how do we actually get mindful reps? This is the question that everyone needs to figure out. I think it's first important to understand the three stages of learning. And we'll get into this. Okay. The three stages of learning. Essentially, anytime you learn a new skill or you are adjusting or adapting a skill that you have previously learned, you're going to go through three stages of learning. Number one is the cognitive stage. And in the cognitive stage, we're all familiar with this. We're having to think really hard about what we are doing. So the cogs are turning in our brain, cognitive cogs turning. Our body movements are often not smooth. They're a little jerky, maybe a little like we're thinking. You can tell someone's thinking really hard about what they're doing. And then typically we're not able to self-correct in this cognitive phase. So we're reliant on other people pointing out the things that we need to do. Now, the next phase of learning, when we've been in that cognitive phase for a period of time, and there's no set period, that period of time is going to differ according to the skill that's being learnt and the complexity of the skill. And it's also going to differ in relation to the learner. How quickly can the learner learn what they're being taught and start to self-correct and self-identify? And the second stage, which we're starting to talk about, is the associative stage. So the root word of associative is, of course, associate. So we're starting to associate what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. We can recognize our own errors. Okay? We're starting to self-correct. We can say, oh, I know what I did there. I was thinking a classic one today. A server tosses the ball and they tossed it over behind them to their left shoulder. And they're leaning to serve. And they're self-correcting in that moment. And when I ask, hey, what did you do there? hey, I tossed it over my left shoulder and behind me, and therefore I didn't have control that I could serve in a straight line. So they're starting to recognize their own mistakes. And this is when the real powerful learning phase occurs, when coaches can ask the questions of why something happened, not just pointing out what you're doing wrong, but we're starting to ask why. Hey, why did this happen? Why did the ball go over there? Why did you lack power in that hit? And they're starting to associate the reasons why it might be. And then they're able to go back, experiment, self correct, and do it again. And that's the exciting phase as a coach. And the final and third stage is the autonomous phase. Okay. And it's the automatic phase. It's the one where you don't really have to think. You're acting a lot on muscle memory and you're going out there and you're just performing. You're able to perform with confidence because you have a high level of competence, because you've got the reps to get there. Now, how many reps does it take to go from cognitive to associative to autonomous? Again, that's going to be completely determined by the learner and the learning environment. So the key part for the coach is to provide the learning environment. The key part for the athlete is to be a good learner, a mindful learner, being aware. They need to come with their brain switched on as much as their body. From here, we start thinking about what's actually going on in our brain. And so I want to talk about this a little bit, the anatomy of a neuron. And of course, a neuron is the connection in our brain. All right. And so anytime we're being cognitive, we are firing these connections in our brain. And the beautiful thing about the connections in our brain is they are always being updated, like a software update. They are always being updated. And if you update enough with the right movement patterns, this is again where it's down to the coach to be coaching the correct movement patterns. And once we have taught the correct movement patterns in the cognitive stage and they're thinking about it a lot, this neuron will fire. And when the neuron fires, it is going to grow in strength. And this little bubble like covering is called myelin. And that myelin will wrap around the neuron as we fire that neuron more often. Sorry, around the axon. Okay, this is all one neuron, and then you've got a synapse at either end, and you've got axons running between, and you've got myelin wrapping around the axon. And as you fire the neuron as a whole, and the message is sent down the axon more consistently and consistently, it will wrap in the substance called myelin. And myelin effectively acts like a superhighway conductor. And so the signal will get faster and faster the more you fire the correct neuron. And so we have to have the correct movement pattern established, and we have to repeat the correct movement pattern, not just, hey, I'm going to hit, I'm going to hit. No, I need to go and hit with the correct movement pattern so that I'm firing the right signals in the brain to create an autonomous function. And as we do that more and more, the myelin will actually thicken to the point where it is conducting at a higher and higher speed. And when we are conducting at a higher speed, that's when we get to the autonomous phase. And so, just as a quick review, why mindful reps are important. We need to be locked in with our brain in this cognitive phase so that we are aware of what our body is doing. And so we are getting the correct movement patterns established. Once we have got the correct movement patterns established with a coach, we need to self correct when we recognize we're bending our arms and passing when we should be keeping them straight and simple. We're recognizing we're dropping our elbow when we hit rather than keeping it on a simple bow and arrow arm swing. Okay. Once we start to recognize those mistakes, we will accelerate our learning and move closer to the autonomous phase faster. And as we discussed, we're in this race against time to get to competence, which will lead to confidence. And as we do these things, as we have this awareness, it's going to help us grow faster and improve quicker and become the athlete or the cook or the sower or the gardener or whatever the skill is we want to work at. We're going to become that master of that subject faster. And the reason this is important in volleyball, I think you can see, but what we want to be doing is teaching our athletes the correct movement patterns, That's the coach's responsibility. And then we want the athlete to pick up responsibility for their own learning and be mindful in getting their reps and be in the associative learning stage where they're starting to self correct. And that's when you'll see the real acceleration and growth happen. So, mindful reps are 100% key to competence and confidence. So, not just reps. We don't want to go out and just get reps. We want to beat the race against time by being mindful, and that will help us increase our competence faster and therefore our confidence. And the reasons that's important is we're going to go through these stages of learning: cognitive, where we're thinking about it really hard; associative, where we know what the movement pattern is and now we're starting to self correct; and then what we all want to be, of course, is autonomous, where we can go out and just be a beast. Now, how you get there? Mindful reps. It's a very clear process. It's up to us as coaches to provide the correct movement patterns and the environment. It's up to the athlete. I'm going to repeat that. It's up to the coach to provide the correct movement patterns and coach the correct movement patterns and the environment for them to learn that is reflective of the game. And then it is up to the athletes to accelerate their own growth by being mindful. And what being mindful means is that we're thinking really hard to begin with, and then we're starting to recognize and self correct. And then from there, we get automatic, recognizing that we're going to dip in and out of the three stages of learning. We won't just be cognitive for a period of time and then associative for a period of time. We'll be cognitive, we'll accelerate up to associative, and then we might forget a couple of things and we'll drop back down to cognitive. Or we might prioritize one area of learning and neglect another. And we'll be associative in one area and back to cognitive in another area. And as we move up that panel, we will eventually get to autonomous. And when we get to autonomous, we will dip less into cognitive and more into associative. And you'd go back and forth from associative to autonomous rather than the initial stages of learning where it's cognitive to associative. So I hope in explaining this a little bit, it helps you understand our philosophy here at Club V of how we teach mindful reps, why they're important, where the responsibility lies with the coach to provide clear instruction on correct movement patterns and the correct environment for them to implement those movement patterns. Then it's up to the athlete to really dive into it, not only with physically, but mentally as well, to think hard about what they're doing and what they're learning, to recognize their own mistakes, and then eventually come to that point of being autonomous, knowing that they're going to have to keep working at it to stay autonomous. We don't just get to stay there. And we understand the way the brain works a little bit in regards to neurons firing and axons and synapses and myelin, and how we wrap myelin around the axon, the more we fire the correct neuron. I think one piece that maybe I neglected to say is if we have an incorrect movement pattern and we update it with a better movement pattern, what will actually happen is the myelin sheath on the incorrect movement pattern will shrink as you increase the size of the myelin sheath on the correct movement pattern. But those are sometimes some of the hardest changes to make, because it's when athletes want to say, hey, I've always done it this way, or my other coach told me to do it this way. And that's where it's super important that they understand the stages of learning. Hey, it's going to be tricky here for you for a minute. You're going to be autonomous in doing it this way, but long term, at the higher level of the game, high speeds of the game, you're going to be more effective if you make this change. Okay? And making that change is going to take time. But as you make that change, you're going to go and shrink the myelin on the incorrect movement pattern and grow the myelin on the correct movement pattern. So, again, mindful learning, super important to growth and development of athletes. And it's one of those things that we stress a lot here at Club V in regards to athletes' growth and the responsibility for their growth. I hope you've enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.